Okay, so what we're continuing in today is an interesting shaila as far as a person who ordered a certain kind of premium hechsher that costs extra money, and the caterer provided him with a different hechsher that has charges the same price, and the caterer has to pass on that price to the consumer, but it's not the hechsher that the consumer wanted. So he doesn't feel that he should have to pay for that other premium hechsher that he normally doesn't hold by, except when he's really, really hungry, like you were talking about. Okay, so let's see. All right. So Hamishna Omeret v'Masechet Bechorot. So here's, oh, whoops, there you go. There we are. Okay. A Mishnah Omeres b'Maseches Bechoros. There's a Mishnah in Tractate Bechorot that states as follows: Ashochet para mechara. Person slaughters a cow and then sells the carcass for its meat and its hide, whatever. Ve'acharei she'achlu noda shehabehema hayta treifa. After the animal is eaten, they discover that the animal was a treifa. Okay, so it can happen. It can happen even in the modern day that there's a mistake that's made and they only realize after the fact that this animal should not have been sold as kosher. Masha achlu achlu, v'hamocher chayav lahachzil hem et hakesef sheshilmu ala par. So interestingly, what's the monetary ramification? So whatever they ate. But the seller has to refund the money that they paid for the purchase of kosher meat. Welcome back, Moshe. And whatever they didn't eat, okay, they have to return that meat and they get a full refund. So let's say they bought $1,000, they paid $1,000 for the meat of one cow. They discover that the animal is a treifa. So you can't regurgitate the meat that you've already eaten, but they have to return whatever they didn't eat. The seller has to give them a full refund, and the seller can then sell this treifa meat to a non-kosher butcher. The kach pasak maran b'shulchan aruch, and that's actually the psak in Shulchan Aruch. So when it comes to getting something that's non-kosher, you're entitled to a full refund. Amnam kasav maran sham, dechol ze davka shenimsa shahabasar haya asur mideoraisa. Aval imacher lo davar she'isuro midorabanan. He says the Mechaber says something really interesting. He says that's only true if what was sold to them was treifas biblically. Like, in other words, they clearly found that the animal was a diseased animal. It had some kind of injury to one of its major organs. But if it turns out that the animal is only a treifa midorabanan, okay, im haperos kayamin, machzir haperos v'notel damav. So whatever is left as far as the meat is concerned, they return that and are entitled to a full refund. Bin kvar ochal osam, masha ochal ochal, v'lo mekabel kaspo b'chazara. But whatever they've eaten, they're not entitled to a refund for, because the truth is, you did benefit from meat that is technically kosher. It may not be kosher midorabanan, but it's kosher midoraisa. You got what you paid for. So, return the stuff that you haven't eaten, get a refund for that part, but you're not entitled to a refund for the stuff that you've already eaten. So the distinction is as follows. Ubir hasma hachiluk bein isur daraisa le'isur darabanan. What's the difference? That if the difference is as follows in logic, if a person ate something that was mamish treif from the Torah, then you can't say he benefited at all from eating that meat. May have tasted great in his, it may have tasted great in his, let's say, what's that, pulled beef sliders, that he had at the social event. But then when they discovered that the caterer got it from a non-kosher source, right? It's feh. Like, I wish I could vomit it. Feh, right? There's no benefit at all. The Adarabba who mitzta'er ma'od she'avar al iser, and he just to the opposite, he's now pained by the fact that he's ingested an usher thing, v'halavai shelo haya ochlo, and he wishes he hadn't eaten it. Ma she'ein kain be'iser derabanan de'enu mitzta'er kol kach. If it's only rabbinically prohibited, no, he doesn't have so much remorse that he ate it. Okay, so therefore, in the case of the Isser Rabbanan, obviously it was wrong for the caterer, maybe who or whoever fed him the food, may not have been aware that there's some Isser Rabbanan attached to this meat, or maybe like it's not glatt, right? In other words, let's say you eat meat that's not glatt, okay, and you hold of glatt. This would be like a comparable situation. And it was fantastic, and you were assured that it was glatt. And then someone later tells you it really wasn't. So, all right, you're not so happy that you were deceived, but it's not like you wish you could vomit it up. In other words, it was taka good. You benefited from it. Right. It is kosher, but it's not the highest standard of kashrus. And by the way, in the Makor Baruch, he says, "Va'ayin sham b'sma shehidi otam the dafka b'isur deoraita chazal kansu hashein kain b'isur derabanan." The Sma gives a different answer as well, and he says, with a biblical, when a person has sold biblically prohibited meat, our sages penalize the seller. You should have been more careful. But with an Isser Durabanan, they're not going to penalize them. So that's sort of a different way of a different kind of answer. But let's stick with this answer that Rav Sharaga gives, which is that it has to do with the fact that Lamaisa, you benefited and your level of remorse is not great. Ulam davar shehu kasher meikar hadin ela shahakona machmir latzmo mishum chumra b'chasidus. But now let's say something is kosher meikar hadin, like really it's kosher, but a person is machmir on a certain area of halacha to go above and beyond the law, like he only eats a certain hechsher. But is the other stuff kosher? Yeah, it's kosher, but it's not to his standards of what he wants to do. So katav haradvaz v'hu dvar gam b'maharit al gazi de'en lokeach taina al hamocher, that the purchaser cannot have any grievance against the seller, even to get his money back for the stuff that he hasn't eaten. Ki hamocher yachol lomer lo mipnei chasidutcha ani afsid, because the seller can tell him, why should I lose money because of your frumkeit? In other words, you want to be more frum and you don't want to eat it. Why should I lose out? Now, at face value, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. What if the seller represented it as a certain kind of standard? Like, it has Chassidish Shechita, right? Has Chassidish Shechita, which has a certain set of additional protocols. And you didn't give me Chassidish Shechita. You gave me regular Shechita. And I'm not happy about that. So why isn't there a Choshen Mishpat issue of misrepresentation? So we're not up to there yet. We're not up to there. The Radvaz's case, it would seem, is that there's no misrepresentation made. The guy represented it as absolutely 100% kosher to the highest standards. The guy bought it. Then he discovered it wasn't shechted by the great Satmar Chosid that he thought it was. And it was instead shechted by some Litvish guy, so who he doesn't know. So he doesn't want to eat it. So the seller can say to him, why is that my problem? Right? Just because you don't want to eat it because of your chumras, that's got nothing to do with me. The chen kasav hapri megadim, the afim yesh deos lahachmir kivin shein halacha ka chayav l'shalim. And the Pri Megadim says that even if there's a machlokes among the poskim, whether to be mekel or machmir, right? And the seller was somech on the more lenient position to declare this to be kosher. So then the buyer cannot have any financial grievance, because prove to me that my standard is not acceptable, right? And so that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Right. So right. So we're not up to that. So that's what I just said. If there's misrepresentation, that's probably going to be a different story. Like a guy can say, I never would have bought it. You told me that it was Hasidic shechita, and yeah, right. Or it wasn't glatt. It was just standard kosher. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. Right. In the Makor Baruch, he also brings um, I don't know Rabbeinu Hagadol Zatzal B'Shut Yabia Omer. I think he's referring to Rav Ovadia. Shedan b'mi shemacha lechaver ochel shahaya mitachat lemita sheyashnu aleha. That a guy sells food that was under a bed where people had slept, and we know, no, seriously, we know that there's a halacha brought down that many people are machmir not to eat food that was under a bed because a ruach ra'ah, an evil spirit, can get into the. So the hakona machmir lo lechol ochel kazeh v'rotza levatel tamekach. And so therefore the buyer wants to nullify the sale, wants a full refund. The hamocher toin, but the seller says, kimli kahamatirim. The seller says, no, I go like those who are makel that say that there's no ruach ra on that stuff anymore. Like maybe in the old days there was. And so Rav Ovadia says the seller has a right to say, I'm not giving you a refund. You want to be machmir not to eat food that was under a bed? Fine, that's you got because you got the heebie-jeebies, But that's got nothing to do with a financial deal that we made, right? It gives you the creeps that you don't, but you can't ask for a refund. Onam ein lehamarsham b'mishpat shalom, mashakasa b'shem achida b'shut chaim shal, denira shecholik ala poskim hanal, spirle da afilu b'chumra ba'alma, yes b'zeh mishum mekach tos. And he seems to disagree. He says that even if there's simply a chumrah that precludes most people from eating this food, then it is a mekach tos. V'ayin b'shut yabia omer shama shehevi b'shem harsham b'sefer giloi das v'tzarachim. So he leaves off with the tzarachim. This is not so clear. But let's see where Rav Sharag is going to go with this. So he says, Lachein lahalacha, im kvar achlu ha'orchem es ha'oichel, chayev hamazmin l'shalem. He says, if they already ate the food, they benefited from the food. So the level of remorse is not to ay, 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 right? So then you have to pay for whatever you ate. Devadai lo yihiyah habadat sheheviu lo yoter garua me'isur derabanan shenifsek b'shulchan aruch dim kvar achlu tzarach l'shalem. Because it shouldn't be any worse. The fact that you had this hashgacha instead of that hashgacha is no worse than a situation where the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if a guy sold meat that only is asr midrabanan, then you can't. You since you've benefited from what you've eaten, you have to pay for it. Aval lifnei sha'achlu, but if it's before the fact, amazmin yachol levatel es hamekach keven shehu lo meunyan ba'hashgacha acheres mima sheizmin zuchuso shelo lechol v'lo chayev l'shalom. But if it's before the fact, and you show up at the wedding that you're making for your daughter, and you meet up with the caterer, and the caterer says everything's all set, we're so excited to cater your dinner, and then you say, well, where's Chaim Yankel, the mashgiach for Hashgacha X? And so you said, well, I couldn't get a hold of them, so I got Hashgacha Y, and here's Moshe Kapoya from Hashgacha Y. He's going to be right. So the Baal Simcha can say, no, I'm not paying you. I'll pay you for. I'll, no. This is all before. If it's before the wedding, it's before the food has been served. The guy can say, no, I'm not paying, and I'm not paying you for the food. I'm not paying because I guess I don't like that hashgacha. I don't normally abide by that hashgacha. So, but the caterer says, yeah, but I got you by the, you know what, it's, in an hour, your daughter's getting married or 2 hours, whatever it is. And what are you going to do? So according to Rav Sharaga, the person making the simcha has a right to say, I don't care whether the caterer has a right to say, I'm not giving you the food if you're not happy with the hashgacha. It's like a Mexican standoff. Right? If you're not paying, I'm not serving dinner. And the balabas can say, well, you're under breach of contract, so I'm not obligated to pay you. What's surprising to me is that Rav Sharag is prepared to say that in the event that people benefited and ate the food, you have to pay for the food that you ate. Now that makes sense, but what about the extra fee for the hashgacha? I am not convinced that you should have to pay for the extra fee for the hashgacha if the guy brought you a hashgacha that you didn't ask for, that you normally don't abide by. So the fee was the same, but I'm only prepared to pay a premium fee for a hashgacha, like the more expensive hashgacha. I'm only prepared to pay for the more expensive hashgacha because I hold by that hashgacha. That's the one that I normally go by. You brought me, like I normally only go by Satmar. You brought me bells. They're both excellent, but I'm a Satmar chassid. I'm not a Belzer chassid. Satmar and bells, they've clashed a lot in the past. So why should I pay for that extra hashgacha for the Belzer guy when that's not what I ordered? So I'll pay you for the food. I'm not satisfied with this answer.
He does realize that.
He does realize it. Right. So I'm not fully satisfied that he's really fully answered this question, because I think that there was misrepresentation if the contract said that it's going to be under Satmar Hashgacha, and now it's under Belzer Hashgacha. That's number one. And number two, so there is a breach of contract. Number two, what am I going to do? The guy's got me in a situation where I have to now go ahead because I've got 300 guests that I have to feed, and they've all come. There's no time for me to find another hall and to go make the wedding somewhere else, right? So I've got to go with this guy, but I don't see why I should have to pay him. It's one thing to say you have to pay for the food because you benefited from the food, but to pay that extra fee for the Belzer Hashgacha. Yeah. It's a lot more money.
So they delivered one, and that's not right.
Of course, and you
should be paying the differential. You should pay for the basic fee.
Right. So that's I have to say this is one of those very short shuvas that I feel that he really could have expanded upon. I'm not really happy with the way that he's answered the question. But a lot of times in Eretz Yisrael, these shayrim are so, there's like hundreds of them, and so it's so hard to keep track. But in any event, I guess we should keep going and let's see. But that's again, the Makor Baruch, the annotator, says that there are times when you can claim mekach tos. Certainly after the fact, you could claim a mekach tos. So he says tzarachim. This is not a pashut halacha. Like, what if a guy says, "I only eat glat," and you sold me non-glat? Or what if it's a Lubavitcher chassid and it's a dairy meal, and the caterer says that everything was chalav Yisrael, then you discover it wasn't chalav Yisrael. So Lubavitchers go nuts over chalav Yisrael. There are a lot of things. Okay, fine. We're not going to necessarily comment on the rationality of some people's emphasis in one particular area of halacha over the other. Some people go like completely overboard with chalav Yisrael, saying that chalav stam is mamish treif, to the point where you have to kasher your kalim, right? If you so a Lubavitcher who ate chalav stam might feel that same sense of revulsion as the person who, if you're saying that it's dependent upon your level of revulsion upon discovery that you ate something non-kosher, And it's funny the way that the Shulchan Aruch makes this distinction between midioraisa and midorabbanan. Let's say a person was accidentally served butter crusted chicken. Okay, dioraisa or diorabanan? Asur b'chalav is only asur midioraisa if it's beef and milk. If it's poultry, if it's poultry and milk, it's only an isur diorabanan. But there's such a stigma against against milk and meat, even chicken and milk, that what you would think that most people would be revolted if they discovered that they had eaten chicken with milk, wouldn't you? So I think I need to research this Shaila a little bit more because there's definitely more stuff here. Maybe I'll give a sugya share on the topic.
Also, fish and dairy for Spartan.
Fish and dairy is a big issue for Spartan.
But I'm too.
It's even less than a derabanan.
What's less than the rubber?
No, a chumrah. It's a chumrah. It's a chumrah. Why is it a chumrah? He says because there's the Pri Megadim says it's in Siman, I think Siman Sadi Vav, I'm not sure, where there is a misprint. Where, yeah, in the Shulchan Aruch, where there's a discussion of the prohibition of eating meat and fish together. And then there's one place where it says, and also not meat, fish and milk. And that's a misprint, according to many of the poskim. A misprint crept in it, but a lot of people hold by it, especially the Sephardim. Yeah. So what if you end up serving, it's for sure not treif. But by the way, even fish and meat is not treif. Yeah, well, that's derabanan, but it's mishum sakana. So let's say I go ahead and I feed beef made with Worcestershire sauce that has a real fish in it. A lot of the Worcestershire sauce can be served with meat because it's bottled. The fish is bottled b'shishim, and so some kashrus organizations will just say OU or okay, but there is a certain Worcestershire sauce where it'll say OU fish. And a guy goes ahead and he prepares a steak with it and he serves it to me and I eat it. So what would you say in that situation? That's clearly only derabanan. So if I eat the steak and then I discover the mashgiach runs in to the restaurant hall and he says, "Don't eat the steak. It's got Worcestershire sauce with fish." And I say, "Oh, sorry, just ate it." And then the mashgiach, who's so upset with the chef for having served it, says, "You better not charge him." And the owner of the restaurant says, "What do you mean? That was $100 steak. How can I not charge him?" That would be a legitimate, issue. So we ask the customer, "Did you enjoy it? Do you have any remorse over eating it?" So. But there's a lot. There's much more here. OU fish. Yeah. Let me see if I can find it really, really quickly. It's on a Worcestershire sauce. OU fish. How do you spell Worcestershire? Okay. It's Leia and Perrins. Okay, here you go. So if you look, I'm just going to share my screen for people here. The OU has this whole thing. Okay. Many Worcestershire sauces contain anchovies. Is it permissible to eat Worcestershire sauce to add it to meat? So we noted in the past halacha yomis that there's a dispute whether fish is nullified in 60 parts. The OU follows the lenient position. As such, Worcestershire sauce that contains anchovies at a ratio of 1:60 may be labeled OU without a fish designation. However, if the anchovies are more than 1 part in 60 of the sauce's components, the product must be labeled OU fish. The question remains whether it is permissible to intentionally add an OU certified Worcestershire sauce, which contains a small percentage of anchovies, to a meat dish. With respect to non-kosher foods, bittul only applies b'di'evet, after the fact, should an accidental mixture occur. But it is not permissible to intentionally or lechatchila effectuate bittul. Like ein mevatlin isur lechatchila. Does the same apply to fish, such that it would be prohibited to intentionally introduce fish to a meat dish at a level where the fish would be batel? One can argue that fish is not a prohibited item, but rather a food that poses a danger. Nullification removes the danger, and therefore may be permissible to intentionally nullify the fish component. Rav Elyashiv maintains that one may, in fact, add a small amount of fish to meat. As such, one may intentionally add OU certified Worcestershire sauce to a meat dish and consume the final product. This is particularly the case with Worcestershire sauce, since the anchovies were already butter in the sauce itself. For simplicity's sake, some companies prefer to label all their Worcestershire sauces with an OU fish symbol, regardless of whether the amount of fish is nullified or not, and the OU accommodates such requests. One may contact the OU office at kosherq@ou.org to inquire if the amount of fish in a specific brand of sauce which bears an OU fish logo is indeed nullified. There you go. Okay, so anyway, I have to confess that I'm not really satisfied with the thoroughness of this tshuva, because it would seem to me that a person should be allowed to claim that he's not going to pay the extra premium fee for the high level of hashgacha. It's one thing to argue that you're going to pay for the food. So I don't think this question has been fully answered. Maybe the next tshuva will have more. Let me just see what the next tshuva is. Here's a similar shaila. Hizmin peros shmita l'chumra kibel heter mechira v'chait dorish kaspo b'chazara. It's Shemitah year, or the year after Shemitah. A guy orders produce that has all the chumras of abiding by Shemitah. Let's say maybe it's peros chutz laaretz. He orders from a guy who says he's a produce salesman, and he says to him, "I'd like to buy 20 kilos of apples or whatever, but I only want it that it's not doesn't without I want it that it's from chutz laaretz," and the guy ends up selling him apples that are from Israel that relied on the heter mechira, where they sold the land to an Arab before Shemitah, and they relied on that. The cha'et doresh kaspo b'chazara. So now the guy wants a refund. It's a very similar shaila, right? In other words, are the apples kosher? It's a question of level of observance. Should you rely on the heter mechira or not? Or let's say he wants otzer bastin, and the guy gives him heter mechira stuff. Well, otzer bastin is another heter, and it's actually in recent years it was always considered that otzer bastin is a preferable way it's superior to heter mechira. What is otzer bastin is a similar mechanism where you basically submit to the bastin that they're in charge of your produce, and that they're the ones who are selling the produce, not the farmer. And as such, because of that, it removes. I don't remember. I gave a whole shir on it, but I don't remember anymore. It removes the problem of Shemitah. And now, right? That's right. That's right. That's right. So now many poskim today in Eretz Yisrael are saying there's no real. They're both using shtick. There's no real advantage of using the heter of the otzer bastin over heter mechira. So it's really unclear to me which one to recommend. But yeah, that's still considered to be the higher standard. But a lot of people are now objecting to it because the way that it's done is not so ideal.
They don't need it anymore. They used it for 100 years.
But the heter
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a similar shaila, and we'll have to work with this. We'll start it tomorrow, Nir Tzusha.